Welcome to another edition of Ask the First Selectman. Our guest, John Zagrodzky, obviously he is the first selectman, and he's going to take your questions, which you can submit by email. This question comes from Kathleen, and she asked, why are pedestrian crossings not marked in all directions at every intersection? Some intersections only have two marked crossings. Do pedestrians have the right of way when crossing an intersection with the green light, even if there is no marked crosswalk? And a follow-up question, how best to handle drivers who do not grant the right of way to pedestrians in a crosswalk?
Uh, Kathleen, thanks for that. There's a lot of questions, and I will see if in my advancing age and decrepitude I can remember them all. But they are serious questions. So let me see if I can peel this apart. So the first thing on crosswalks, one of the first rules of crosswalks is that they need to connect pedestrian walkways or pedestrian spaces. So in other words, you don't want to have a crosswalk, as they say, to nowhere, where you're linking sort of two areas where there are not sidewalks feeding both sides of the crosswalk. And in fact, in the 2015 Pedestrian Infrastructure Committee report, one of the things they had in that report was well over 100 recommended locations for installation of crosswalks. And most of them were turned down by the Police Commission, which is our legal traffic authority, for that reason, which is that the crosswalks connected two areas or two spots that were not served by sidewalks. And so when you look at an intersection and you see crosswalks, one thing you might notice is that where there is no crosswalk, there's not a logical connection between, say, two sidewalks. That might actually be part of the reason. But the crosswalk science goes beyond that. And it gets to your second point about pedestrians having the right of way and what to do about cars not stopping in a crosswalk. Sometimes crosswalks are rejected for installation because, oddly, they can increase the danger. One of the problems with crosswalks is that, yes, when there's a crosswalk, pedestrians have the right of way, but you still really have to pay attention because sometimes drivers get distracted or they don't always stop at crosswalks. I've seen that myself. Personally, when I come up to a crosswalk, even though it's marked there, and even though drivers are technically required to stop to let me pass, they'll only do that 20% of the time. Most of them just drive right by. And frankly, what I do is I'm looking in all directions and I wait until it's clear and then I walk. One of the worries about crosswalks is that people will come up to them and see the crosswalk marking and say, hey, it's a crosswalk. I have the right of way. I'll just step into the street because all vehicles are required to stop. That's true, but that's a pretty dangerous way to approach a crosswalk. I think it's much better for people to pay attention whether there's a crosswalk or not. And for that reason, sometimes there's a reluctance to install crosswalks because they give people a false sense of security sometimes because not all motorists are stopping. So that's a little bit why we have not that many crosswalks in town and why we encourage everyone who comes up to a crosswalk that even if you have the right of way, if you're a pedestrian, take the time to look in all directions and assume that cars coming your way are not going to stop. Just assume that. And when it's clear, and then walk. I hope that helps you. If anybody has questions about crosswalks, I know it's a sensitive topic and folks would like to see more. I'm happy to take your questions. Please contact me or anyone who serves on the Police Commission.
Yeah, and the third part of her question was, what should you do if somebody does not yield the right of way and you're a pedestrian? Do you report them? Do you yell at them?
I'm sorry. That's a good question. I mean, you could report them. I mean, you'd have to have photographic evidence that the person was going through the crosswalk, that there was somebody standing there in the crosswalk waiting to cross. That's pretty hard to photograph and get to the point where it passes a reasonableness threshold for evidence in a case. I do know that our police officers are out monitoring traffic for all traffic infractions, whether it's speeding, running red lights, any of that sort of thing. I don't know the statistics around enforcement and crosswalks, but if you do see someone going through a crosswalk when they shouldn't, you're welcome to call the non-emergency police department line and report that. I just don't know how much they're going to be able to do about it. This strikes me as something that the police actually have to witness themselves in order for there to be proper enforcement. And that's going to be dependent on whether the police officer's there at the time of the infraction. So it's not to say that there's no enforcement. There certainly is. I think rather this is just a reminder that this is something that's not always enforced simply because we don't have police all over town at every crosswalk. And it should just again remind you that it's your responsibility to be safe in a crosswalk always.
If you have a question for our first selectman, just send it along to us. We will ask it on your behalf. Just email us at DarianTV79 @gmail.com.